In this video, we're going to take a look at the last part of activity 3.1.5, variables and functions for the VEX Cortex and using Robot C. In the screen here for Robot C, you're going to see I have part 2B program still up. Just to make sure to go on to the next part, I'm going to go ahead and say save to make sure I save anything off part 2B. Go to File, Save As, and I can go ahead and name this to be part 3. Hit the save button and go ahead and change over some of the information. So what we're going to do here is in part 3, the task description that they say is we're going to define a function. And I'm going to go ahead and take out our pseudocode that we had from part 2, and we'll take out our program as well with that. So give a little bit of room between our task main's curly braces. And from here, when I take a look at this, is they say, you know, we want to make sure to put in this section of code above the task main, and so that way it's going to be declared and be defined at a global level. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this code, say copy, and on this one they want it to be above the task main. So I'm going to have to actually move the task main down a little bit and then copy and paste that there. So here's the thing that we have is that the word void does not mean that it cancels anything out, which can sometimes be a little bit of confusion. So here, when you hit void, you're actually just saying void is the assigned word to say that LED control is a word that we created to do some LED control. So if the sensor value of the bump, so what that means is if anytime you see LED control in the task main, that means that if the sensor value of the bump switch is equal to 1, we turn the LED on, else we turn the LED off, and you can see that's kind of what we have. So the void section is, and here's what I'll probably do is I'll back these curly braces off just a little bit, is it allows us to go through, let me fix the formatting, there we go. The void just goes through and defines the function as it has in the comment there. So, and then, so let's go ahead and write that into our pseudocode. So let's define function LED control. Then what we're going to do is inside of those braces we want to go through and say, and then let's state the actions of LED control, which means we're going to turn the green LED on. So which I probably need to put in another line above that says if the bump switch is pressed, turn LED on. If the bump switch is not pressed, turn the green LED off. And that's kind of what's going on in our particular function section. So when I go through and I can comment this a little bit more, and I can grab my lines of comments from my pseudocode. Okay, so that's kind of what we have going on. Okay, and then they say use the program, this section in the task main, so then that way we can do that. So I'm actually going to grab this while 1 equals 1, and I don't want to grab the task main sections, I just want to grab what's in between it. Okay, so then with inside of the task main, let me get rid of some of the extra lines here. Let me fix our formatting. So now what we're saying here is in the task main, while 1 equals 1, LED control is doing what they call the function call. So what it's doing is anytime it sees that, it's going to do these commands. So now I'm going to go ahead and compile the program, and let's download the robot. And let's go ahead and hit start. So now watch our green LED. So now it's constantly checking to see what LED control is. If the bump switch is pressed, the light turns on. If it's not pressed, it turns off. Which, in some cases, it's like, okay, well, what did we just do here? Well, you know, why did we need to do, you know, learn something new to do that? Well, the thing is functions are great whenever you have a lot of repetitious actions going on. And like, for example, flashing an LED could be a really great way to go through and create a function. So where you could go through and have it where it flashes a certain amount of times, you do some other actions, and then you go through and you flash the LED. So rather than having to rewrite that code, if you flash like for 5 seconds on an LED, this LED control would be one single line. You can group together multiple lines of code to be able to come up with one single kind of function call that would do that. So up above the task main, you have to define it though. It's like, for example, instead of LED control, we could say LED flash. And then we could go through and do that. So for example, just to kind of drive this point home, I'm going to say, we'll call this LED flash. And then rather than having an if-else statement, here's another thing that we can do. I'm going to take out this if-else kind of statement. So here I could say, turn LED on green, wait for 1 second, turn LED off green, wait for 1 second. And then let's say I want to do that so that way it does it 5 times. Well, here I've turned it on and off twice, so there's 2 seconds. There's 4. And then I would need to go ahead and say, take off the last one there. All right, so you can see, here's where I went through and put an LED flash. Turn LED on, wait a second, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, and then we turn it off at the end. So here you can see from 28 to 38, we've got about 10 lines of code that we go through and have in this particular case. It's like, man, if we had to go through and copy and paste this in all the time, we'd have a huge program. So rather than do that, let's say we go through and we say, when we write a code that's something along the lines like this. So while 1 equals 1, if, we'll say sensor value of bump switch is equal to 1, let's write, you know, start motor, write motor at, we'll use 63. We'll wait for 5 seconds. We'll say stop the motor. And then let's go ahead and have it flash the LED. So we'll say LED flash. And then we'll have it go through and kind of do like a left motor kind of scenario as well. So let me copy this and paste. And we'll change these over to the left motor. And let's go ahead and have it flash the LED again. So now we've got a function call twice within our particular case. So I'm going to go ahead and say, and then let's do, I think we need one more brace there, yep, for the if condition. And then else, we'll just say stop the motor, right motor, and stop motor, left motor. And then we'll say turn LED off green. So we'll make sure that everything gets turned off. All right, compile. Okay, we'll see if there's any. Oh, so here's another thing. We need to make sure our sensor is enclosed in parentheses. There we go. Okay, no other errors. Let's compile, download the robot, and we'll watch the behaviors as it goes through and does that. So we'll hit start. So if I press the bump switch, it'll run the right motor. You're going to see the LED flash here in a moment. So there it's going to run for 5 seconds. So it's running the LED flash. There's the 2. The second motor running. Now watch, it's going to flash this again. And then now it's in the else scenario. So if I press this button again, it'll do the exact same thing once it runs the motor. Now I can watch for the blink for the LED flash function to run. Second motor runs. Once it gets done running, there's our second LED flash. So what we just did is, rather than having all those lines of code without the function, we would have to go through and copy and paste that 10 lines of code up here and put them in wherever we saw LED flash. So this would expand our program quite a bit. So this goes through and helps us write a more condensed program, but also to keep us from having to write a lot of different kind of repetitive commands. So by creating a function. All right, so that is activity 315, part 3, dealing with defining a function, which also finishes out our video series on activity 315, variables and functions.